Hello everyone, my name's Kitetsu and welcome back to my channel. So this is a fairly landmark video. Excuse the fact that it's really late, it's taken me a while to prepare it, but this is a landmark video because it is the first time I believe I've ever managed to get a lore series to episode 4. Now I did an Age of Sigmar one, it kind of got stuck around episode 3, but this one I have bigger and better plans for and I really do want to keep it going. Now for this particular episode I had to do so much prep work. Pretty much most of yesterday I spent reading, making notes. This is the first time I think I've ever had to make loads of notes for a fantasy lore video. So in front of me right now there are tons of books scattered. Now as usual we're continuing looking at things mostly from the perspective of 8th edition fantasy, so I'm using that massive book you can see to the left on the screen at the moment. But this time I needed to enlist the help of the Dark Elves Army book, which I've got open in front of me right now as well. But yeah, there was kind of so much information missing from the big book that if I had have just kind of glossed over some of these events, it's kind of weird because if you read the 7th edition book, then the 8th edition book, and then the army book, you get a different perspective of these events. So let's get straight into this video and recap super fast what happened in the last episode. So Aenarion is dead, if you remember. If you don't, make sure you go watch the previous video. This really does follow on and it's not going to make that much sense in isolation. But there was a huge demonic invasion. Aenarion has the Sword of Cain. He kind of becomes this terrifying avatar. He destroys those 4 greater demons of chaos and that pretty much finishes him off. Kalidor the Dragon Tamer summoned this magical Great Vortex to siphon away all of the excess magical energy floating around the old world. And yeah, Aenarion's dead. The Sword of Cain is back in the Shrine of Cain on, I think it was called the Blighted Isle. We can check that in a minute. And we are left in a situation where his second wife, Morathi, has had his son, Malekith, and basically we're ushering in a kind of new era of peace. So to start things off, now that Aenarion is dead, the logical line of progression should go to Malekith. In fact, I'm going to hold that thought right there for 2 seconds and just show you that Aenarion's reign was relatively short, and we are entering the reign of the successor, Bel Shanaar, who's followed by Kalidor the First and Second, but I will be coming back to this timeline at the end of the episode because there are a few extra events we need to cover, such as Chaos Dwarves and the Great Moor. So bear with me, we'll talk about those extra events at the end. I kind of want to focus on what's happening with the elves at the moment because it's far more important for now. So the logical line of progression should go to Malekith, but there is an issue. If you remember, Aenarion was a little bit of a tyrant towards the end of his reign and no one would really stand against him. So the general population of Ulthuan is kind of suspicious and slightly cautious of immediately acknowledging his son and allowing him to come to the throne. You know, there are some doubters amongst the population who are saying, well, as great as Aenarion was and as much as he was once this great champion and he kind of vanquished the demonic hosts, he was also a bit of a tyrant. Maybe his son's going to be exactly the same. You know, we've got some reservations there. So instead of crowning Malekith, they end up crowning someone called Bel Shanaar. So here you go, here is some artwork of Bel Shanaar. So this guy is now the second Phoenix King. Now Malekith kind of accepts this with good grace. He's like, okay, that's fine, you know, I'm for the people. If that's the will of the people, then that's absolutely fine. And he is the first person to swear fealty to Bel Shanaar. So on the surface, everything is absolutely fine, it's great, everyone's fine. But in his heart, there is always an underlying small amount of resentment for the fact that really he is the true heir to the throne of Ulthuan. He should be the king of all of the elves. But whereas Malekith accepts it with good grace, it is Morathi who is absolutely enraged. Like, she cannot stand this. It feels like her birthright or her heritage has been torn away from her. She married the king, her son was meant to be the king, she was meant to essentially now be the king's mother. and it's been totally taken away from her, and she is seriously angry. And it's actually Morathi that causes so many of the issues that cause the formation of the Dark Elves in the first place, and that end up tearing the High Elves apart. So Bel Shanaar's the new Phoenix King. Malekith decides that he's going to leave Ulthuan. He gets on a ship, he sets sail, and this is where a map is going to come in handy. At this point, we haven't really established that the continent to the west is known as the New World. This is where the lizard men and all of that lot came from. Ulthuan kind of sits in the middle, and the continent to the right is known as the Old World. So whereas I generically call this whole thing the Old World, actually that's not strictly accurate. But Malekith sets sail from Ulthuan, and the elves reach the region here, which essentially is what becomes modern day Bretonnia. Back then it wasn't called Bretonnia and it had different names, but this place is really important to the elves because it kind of is their first venture into the Old World, and it's their kind of easternmost frontier. Beyond that barrier, you've got orcs, you've got goblins, you've got territory that is just not controlled by them. So this place up here, L'Anguille, I don't know how to pronounce it, it sounds French, as with most things Bretonian. It wasn't called that back then, as we'll get onto in a moment, but that becomes a very important place for Malekith. And in terms of the timeline, I'm guessing we are around about this point here, so minus 4119, where the elves are reaching the Old World finally. So Malekith begins to explore the new continent. He ends up going on all these great adventures, fighting battles against orcs and goblins and beastmen and stuff like that. He gets a pretty impressive reputation. Now, this place here, which I just mentioned, it was actually called, let me get this right, Tor Alessi back then, and this is where Malekith ends up meeting his wife, Alisara. They meet each other, they end up getting married. Now, Alisara, there's no official artwork of her, but it turns out that she is the sister of the Mage Queen Ariel, and she is another really important figure in Warhammer Fantasy because she is the queen of Athel Loren, which is where the Wood Elves are. So he gets married to Alisara, and this is the point where the elves end up meeting up with the dwarves. Remember, the dwarves were occupying the World's Edge Mountains in the last episode, and they're spreading slightly westward at this point, and they come in contact with Malekith. Because they have a mutual enemy in the goblins, the orcs, and the beastmen, and all other foul creatures of chaos, they end up forming a very strong alliance between each other. These races are very different from a kind of creational perspective. They represent very different ideals. You know, the old ones created them to be basically opposites, and they're kind of suspicious of each other, but this guy here, High King Snorri of the Dwarfs, ends up becoming a very close personal friend of Malekith. It's pretty much Malekith's skill as a battle general that ends up kind of earning Snorri's respect, and in the end, not only do they form a really close alliance with each other, they actually swear an oath of brotherhood, and they pledge eternal friendship, which, spoilers, this is the first and last time such an unprecedented good relationship would happen between the elves and the dwarves. And yeah, basically there's a period of prosperity and trade between elf and dwarf, and as a prince of the elves, Malekith is doing amazingly well. He's highly regarded, he's respected by all. Bel Shanaar ends up making him the ambassador to the High King, and yeah, relationships between Malekith and Bel Shanaar end up kind of fraying at this point. They reference in the lore that Bel Shanaar decides he's going to grace the Old World with his presence and announce himself to High King Snorri. Bel Shanaar basically insults Malekith by stressing really strongly that the kind of elegance and power and grandeur of the elves is with himself and the council and the other princes residing in Ulthuan, and basically making Malekith feel like he's a nobody. But Malekith keeps exploring, he gets kind of bored, he leaves his wife to go and explore the Old World some more. He returns to Ulthuan to find his father's armor on the Blighted Isle. It describes his moment of being absolutely transfixed, looking at the altar of Cain. I assume the sword was there, and it kind of surprises me that he wasn't tempted to take it at this point. To the north, he finds a magical artifact of really great power, the Circlet of Iron, and that's what he wears on his head. And there's something wrong with that crown. It ends up slightly corrupting him, having it, so close to his head. But at this point, he's becoming frustrated, power hungry, and he ends up turning down a path of studying forbidden magic. He ends up returning back to his wife, who's really excited to see him. But at this point, Malekith is kind of despondent. He's distant. He's not the same person he was when she met him. Now, what you're looking at on the screen at the moment is basically the pantheon of gods that the Dark Elves worship. In the middle is Cain, the bloody-handed god of murder, who is the most important god to the Dark Elves. These inner circle represent the gods of the underworld, and the ones around the edge are the gods of the heavens. And Alisara, his wife, is a maiden of Lilith, which is this symbol down here. And Lilith ends up sending her a vision to do with the future of Malekith and who he's going to become, and basically she runs away in the middle of the night. There's this great description of how when he first arrives, she can't see his future or his fate anymore, and initially she could, and it was really bright and optimistic, and yeah, that vision freaks her out. She takes off in the middle of the night, and Malekith is enraged. He spends ages searching for her, and eventually his kind of twisted nature gets to the point where he gives up even caring. So Malekith decides to return to Ulthuan at this point after he's kind of given up on his wife, and he finds the place in absolute turmoil. Basically, Bel Shanaar has not managed to keep things under control, and all of these cults are springing up. There's crazy things happening, and Bel Shanaar is just losing control. So Malekith arrives back with all of his kind of flourish that you'd expect, and everyone's looking at him thinking, oh, finally, our savior's come back. The true king is here. He's going to sort out Ulthuan. He's going to fix the problems, and he declares, yep, I'm going to sort everything out. And unfortunately, he discovers that it is his mother, Morathi, who is at the center of all of these cults. Now, publicly, Malekith denounces his mother and imprisons her, and this is where, in the army book at least, the story is a bit vague. We don't know exactly when this happened, but this is the turning point where Malekith actually decides to twist and kind of warp his perceptions of things. I imagine, but I'm not entirely sure, that Malekith visited his mother in prison and spoke to her, or she, more importantly, spoke to him, and she manipulates him. She can see that he's already darkening and twisting, and she feeds off of his jealousy, and she exaggerates it and makes him start to hate Bel Shanaar, and feeding him all these grand ideas of how he is the rightful king of Ulthuan and he needs to take back his birthright. So in secret, whilst his mother is imprisoned, the two of them begin to plot together to overthrow Bel Shanaar. And this is where it describes 1,600 years of heroism and valor being undone in a single night. Malekith ends up calling all of the princes of Ulthuan to this place here, the Shrine of Azurian, with the kind of pretext of wanting to take control of the Ulthuan armies to fix all of these problems with the cults that are springing up. And when he is there, he blames Bel Shanaar for basically being a cultist. Not only does he blame him as being a cultist in front of all of the other princes of Ulthuan, he hands him a chalice of poisoned drink. Now, in 8th edition, it looks like they've slightly retconned the story and changed it. In the 8th edition, the poison doesn't kill him, it merely disorientates and confuses him. So Malekith is accusing him, and Bel Shanaar is basically not really able to deny the claims because he's fogged and confused by the poison. But unfortunately for Malekith, the other princes of Ulthuan that are present don't believe him, and instead they turn around and call Malekith a traitor, and basically, yeah, they denounce him. They don't believe him. So in the confusion that follows, loads of agents of Malekith break into the shrine. In all the confusion, Malekith personally cuts down Bel Shanaar and murders him. The agents start attacking the princes, and blood is spilling across the floor of the Shrine of Azurian. Now, at the Shrine of Azurian, they have the sacred flame, and remember, this is what Aenarion stepped into and became this living embodiment of power. So, believing himself to be pure and the rightful kind of ruler of the elves, Malekith steps into the flames, expecting himself to ascend in the same way his father did, but unfortunately, because of the darkness in his heart, the flames reject him, and he is screaming in rage and agony as these flames are tearing into his flesh and burning him apart. He just about manages to throw himself out of the flames before they consume him for good, and he's gone, but he's now a shadow of his former self. The agents break away from their fight with the princes, scoop up his body and flee to the north, but as part of his treacherous plan to take over, from the north of Ulthuan, his region, which on this map is called the Shadowlands, I had to find another map to realise that it's called Nagarith, he's actually sent his army down to attack. So his army is marching south. At the same time, he called the princes to this meeting, and whilst he is fleeing north, Morathi takes control of that army and basically all hell breaks loose. As he travels north, it describes how he uses his skill as a politician to start corrupting more and more elves to his cause. But yeah, he's stoking the fires of resentment in some of the elves. He even contacts a whole load of sorcerers, and this enormous magical battle breaks out. Civil war erupts across Ulthuan. The flames of Azurian that are burning his body are magical, so he can't put them out, and slowly it's consuming him, and he is still in absolute agony. He has all of these agents spreading chaos. One of these agents, who is actually supplying the Dark Elves with weapons and sowing confusion and discord everywhere, is a high priest called Hotep. He's operating down in this region. After they discover who he is, he retreats to Nagarith. He tries to fix the flames that are burning Malekith, and he can't, so he ends up forging this magical rune-etched black armor, and he actually attaches this armor directly to Malekith's skin to kind of preserve and maintain him. And this is the point where Malekith is finally ready to lead his armies once more. He's got the Circlet of Iron, he's got magical black armor, he's astride a black dragon called Sulek, I think I'm pronouncing that right, that's warped by forbidden powers. He's now a master of magic, and at this point, he is finally reborn, as it were, as the Witch King. And I'm gonna leave the episode there, apart from to say that the elves currently being leaderless without Bel Shanaar, they end up in desperation electing Kalador I, whose actual name is Imric, as the third Phoenix King, and he's a warrior, so they think he is going to be the answer to Malekith. So things are going to pick up in the next episode, looking at the Sundering and the proper civil war breaking out between Malekith and the High Elves. Okay, that was a hell of a lot of information. Hopefully you're still here and still with me and you enjoyed that episode. The very last thing I'm going to talk about is the emergence of the Chaos Dwarves, Chupayotl, if I'm saying that right, sinking, and the Great Moor. So we've pretty much covered everything from the time of dragons at the moment up to Malekith's attempt on the crown and the start of Kalador I's reign and when the Sundering begins. But if we go way back to when the Great Vortex has kind of sealed things off, this is when the Chaos Dwarves actually form. Now, obviously, you could make an entire video, and at some point I probably will, on the Chaos Dwarves. But remember that the Dwarves started in the Southlands and they migrated up through the mountains. They end up colonizing all of this region. They travelled westward to meet up with Malekith when he first arrived in the Old World. but a small population of them also spread to the east. So it says that they travel to a settlement in Zorn Uzkul, and looking at this map that I've taken out of the 8th edition rulebook, it didn't even show where Zorn Uzkul is. I had to find a second map, and we've zoomed in on this region here. So these are the World's Edge Mountains. These ones here are the Mountains of Morn, which come down the side here, and Zorn Uzkul is on this plateau right up there. So it's about there, perhaps. But basically, a small subset of the dwarves end up going east. They populate this region in the Darklands. They end up, some of them in the Morn Mountains, some of them go north, and obviously with that great incursion of chaos demons that happened just before the Great Vortex kind of semi-fixed things temporarily, besieged by demons, they end up actually losing contact with the dwarves in the World's Edge Mountains. Those dwarves who were in the World's Edge Mountains believe that all of those who went east are dead. They couldn't possibly have survived the demonic invasions, especially not without their mountain holds. And being forsaken by their own people, feeling abandoned, cut off, isolated, they actually end up turning to worship the Father of Darkness, Hashut, which is one of the Chaos entities. They end up forming their own sort of tower or capital at Zar Nagarand, which is this place over here. And this is the first major Chaos Dwarf citadel that rises up, but more of them start appearing in the Darklands. Now, what is particularly fascinating about the Chaos Dwarves is they actually end up turning to sorcery. Now, as we discussed in, I think, maybe part 1 or 2, the dwarves were meant to never be magical creatures, and it's not a natural state for them, and therefore they simply can't sustain this magic. And what ends up happening to these sorcerers is that very slowly they end up turning into stone. They're cursed, essentially. It starts with the feet, and yeah, basically over time their entire body will turn into a statue, and apparently the pathway leading to Nagarand is just lined with the statues of these Chaos Dwarves. But that's a really fascinating story that we will have to investigate further in another episode. We also had Chupeotl sinking. This was a temple city of the lizard men. So if we zoom in on Lustria with this map here, Chupeotl is down here, and basically there's this big earthquake and tectonic upheaval, and it ends up sinking below the waves. And this really disturbs the Slann, because being kind of the children, as it were, of the Old Ones had left all of these prophecies and predictions of things that would happen in the future, and Chupeotl sinking under the waves was never predicted by the Old Ones. So they thought they had the future mapped out, they had certainty and security in that, and something happening like this that was never predicted really unsettles them, and it's kind of a sign that the way things were meant to happen are no longer happening. The kind of natural order of things has been disturbed. And the very final thing, if we fast forward quite a long time, is the emergence of the Great Maw, which happens shortly after Malekith tries to take the Phoenix Crown. Basically, this is an absolutely enormous warpstone meteorite that crashes through the atmosphere just above Cathay over here to the east. It slams into the homeland just there of the ogre tribes in the region. Hundreds of thousands of ogres are killed in this colossal titanic impact, and it basically says that when the dust settles, there's this enormous maw hundreds of leagues across dominating the ground. Here's a picture of a cave painting that the ogres have created because they start to worship this big fanged maw, believing it's some kind of deity. But the chances are it is nothing more than a warpstone meteorite impact site that their primitive brains can't really comprehend as being something just that simple. To them, they don't look at the science of it. They use superstition to interpret what they've seen. But right, wow. That was I believe, quite a long episode. It's going to take me a while to edit this. It took me a hell of a long time to do all this research. The timeline is slowly filling in, you know, know, we are getting up towards the time of the Age of the Three Emperors and the current year. There is so much storyline with what's going on with the elves that I just had to split this video in two and do the Sundering as a separate part. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I am slowly getting to grips with the fantasy lore, but my goodness, it is complicated, it's very in-depth, and having a proper timeline like this is making a huge difference. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it. It's the best way to let me know that you want more of these episodes. Don't forget to subscribe if you are new to the channel, and I will see you guys really soon in the next video.